Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 401, Back to School. Billy stood in front of the principal's desk and shook with frustration. He had worked way too hard to have Alex swoop in and take his place. He had to stop it. He had to drive Alex away. "Principal, I must protest," he said. "I knew this guy at university. He's just a bum. He's not even a qualified teacher. How could he be allowed to teach classes at our school?" The principal glowered at him, obviously displeased with his aggression and dismissive attitude. "Billy," he said, "you shouldn't have prejudice against new colleagues. You yourself are newly graduated, but we gave you a job here anyway. Was that a mistake? I don't think so. Bold and unconventional hiring is how Oak Ridge stays fresh." There was some truth to the principal's words, but he was leaving out important facts. He had been ordered to hire Alex, and he had to obey. Billy's feelings on the matter were as unimportant as his own. There was no room for discussion. They stared tensely at each other. While Billy desperately wanted Alex not to be hired, he knew that he could not afford to make an enemy of the principal. The principal, for his part, could not afford to make an enemy of Alex, nor the people who stood behind him. But Alex's arrival had disrupted all of Billy's plans. He had a carefully laid out career path in mind, and it included becoming the head teacher for Class 6. In that position, he could form connections with their wealthy parents and students themselves who would no doubt go on to inherit that wealth. The other teachers seemed oblivious to the benefits of their profession, but Billy knew them very well. Many students at Oak Ridge were from wealthy and influential families, and Class 6 contained an especially high concentration of them. If he could get to know the families and make sure they knew that he had propelled their children into academic excellence, he would win many powerful friends. So far, his plan had worked beautifully. As teaching director, he had little contact with parents, but he had been able to drive off many teachers from Class 6 without seeming to be the cause. And since he wasn't seen as part of the problem, he was seen as part of the solution. The troubling loss of teachers was a double benefit to him. It made him a valued part of the staff, and it left openings for when he wanted to gain more exposure to the parents. He had waited to make his move, and now the time was right. The teacher in charge of Class 6, Mr. Goldberg, had been badly beaten, and there were only 3 months until graduation. Billy would swoop in, raise the kids' grades, and take the credit. The principal had agreed that the job was his. It was a done deal. And then, Alex had shown up. The principal broke the silence. "There's no way, Billy," he said. "I can't change this decision." Realizing that it was useless to keep arguing, Billy stormed out of the principal's office in a bitter rage. On the way out, he clenched his fists and muttered to himself. "Alex," he thought as he recalled their history, "I took your girlfriend once, and I'll take this job. Whatever you do, I'll always come out on top. I'll do whatever it takes. Count on that." He slammed the office door shut behind him and stormed off. When Alex came to school for his introduction, the principal brought all the teachers into the conference room. He told them only that Alex was a new PE teacher and that he was taking over responsibility for Class 6. And then he sat down and opened the floor for questions. One of the older teachers who sat next to Alex looked him over with scornful eyes. He was Leonard Winters, one of the longest-serving and most respected teachers at the school, and Billy had made sure to tell him about Alex. Leonard was repulsed by Alex's lack of experience, and Billy counted on him to help turn the other teachers against him. "And what exactly are your qualifications for this position?" Leonard asked derisively. "And who are you?" Alex responded with a smile. It was clear to him that the question had only been asked to put him down. He decided to respond in a similar fashion. "My name is Leonard Winters. I've been here at Oak Ridge for over 20 years. Before that, I taught at private schools all over the country and even overseas. Many of my former students are among the most successful people in the country." He looked proud, as if the achievements of his students were his own. "I see," Alex said dismissively. Leonard's bragging didn't impress him. "I'm sure you're great at preparing students for wealth and success, but have you ever considered that teachers should also be role models?" Leonard looked confused. He didn't understand what Alex was getting at. "Of course, Mr. Ambrose," he answered. "What are you trying to say?" "I mean that we should teach them how to behave toward others," Alex shot back. "But you're pompous, arrogant, and impolite. It seems to me that you shouldn't be a teacher, and I don't know how you can sit here and talk about education as if you understand it." The atmosphere of the whole conference room changed completely. The air filled with nervous tension, and Leonard and all the teachers stared at Alex in complete disbelief at what he had said. "How dare you?" Leonard exclaimed in complete shock. The idea that a newcomer would ever speak to him in such a way was incomprehensible to him, especially in front of the other teachers. Alex only smiled and put his feet up on the conference room table. "Ridiculous," he muttered as he leaned back with a satisfied look on his face. Episode 402, Teacher's Bet. Leonard trembled with anger. "What did you say to me?" he asked. "I think you heard me," Alex answered with a sly smile. "Unless you're hard of hearing, of course." They stared at each other, and the other teachers sat in dumbstruck silence. Nobody knew what to say or do. The tension in the conference room was reaching a breaking point. Billy slapped the table fiercely and stood up. He saw an opportunity to turn his colleagues against Alex, and he wasn't going to pass it up. "What kind of an attitude is this?" he asked with feigned incredulity. "It's your first day on the job, and this is how you greet your new colleagues?" Alex turned to look at him and smiled. He was completely relaxed, and the pleasure of telling them all off was making him laugh on the inside. "Respect is earned," he said, "since all I see are a bunch of scoundrels. Rather than people who want to do their best for the students, I won't be polite." This is outrageous," Billy stammered. Alex's behavior had taken him completely aback. He didn't know what to do. "Don't waste my time," Alex said. "I'm taking over Class 6, and unless you have the power to stop me, you should shut your useless mouth about it." Billy's face reddened. He remembered how he had been able to shove Alex around. But the person sitting in front of him now was completely different. He searched for something to say, but he could find nothing. For his part, Alex didn't hold a grudge. He remembered Billy all too well, and he had decided not to make a big deal of their reunion. But now it was clear that Billy wasn't going to let things be. The principal had said that Alex had been given Class 6 over one of the staff, and it was now clear who that someone was. The other teachers didn't know what to think. Alex was different from any teacher they had ever known. They couldn't make sense of him. Before the meeting, he had hounded some of them with questions about teaching, and they had thought him uninformed and weak. His interactions with Leonard and Billy had changed their impression, and now they thought him arrogant and rude. Either way, they dreaded the thought of working with him. Billy was fuming. He couldn't allow Alex to treat him like this in front of everyone. He was the young up-and-comer, the rising star everyone thought had figured everything out. It was an impression he had spent every ounce of his energy to build, and now it was at risk of being destroyed. "Who are you calling useless?" he asked impudently. "I was talking to you, obviously," Alex said leisurely. "And I told you to be quiet and not get in my way. Weren't you paying attention?" At this point, the principal rose and stepped in to avoid an altercation. "Everyone here is simply dedicated to delivering the best teaching we can. The seniors in Class 6 are the most boisterous we have. No doubt your colleagues are simply worried about you." "I see," Alex responded. "Well, just give me a month. If I don't handle my students well, I'll resign at that point. But I hope that my fellow teachers will give me a chance, and that they won't interfere with my work. If they do, I won't be playing nice." The teachers looked at each other and sneered. Class 6 had been an unsolvable problem for years, and none of the previous teachers had been able to whip them into shape. Many had been injured trying, and now Alex was telling them he could do it in a month without any prior experience. Many of them were offended, and some of them were amused. They all wanted to see what would happen. "I'll bet he gives up and leaves before lunch today," one of the teachers said. "I'll take that bet," said another. "But I'll raise the stakes. I'll bet the students manage to seriously injure him before today's over." A third teacher stood up, leaned over the table, and looked Alex in the eye. "If you're still here tomorrow, those kids are yours. And all of us will look to you as our teacher as well." He leaned back and laughed. "I don't know about that last bit," Alex answered and laughed. "I don't accept students unless they're decent people." As soon as he said this, more than half of the teachers stood up and glared at him. He simply looked at them. "I'll tell you what," he said. "If anything goes wrong today, I won't be back tomorrow. One of you can replace me. But if nothing goes wrong, you all have to run 50 laps around the school racetrack. What do you say?" "Well, of course," Leonard blurted out instantly. He didn't think there was any risk of Alex winning such a bet. The other teachers nodded and agreed. The principal ended the meeting, and everyone stood up. The teachers cleared out of the room, and Alex stood and watched as they all left. When he thought that he was alone, he started moving toward the door. But as he took his first step, he heard a soft voice behind him call out his name. He turned around. A sweet-looking female teacher stood behind him. They were alone in the conference room. He looked quietly at her. "It's Alex, right?" she said. "I'm Lynn Bowen. I'm a math teacher. I'm afraid you don't know what you're getting into with the Class 6 seniors. You should be careful." Lynn looked a little worried. She looked to be around 30 years old, and Alex could tell that she was a kind-hearted person. "Is that so?" he said and smiled at her. "I appreciate your confidence, but I think you're a bit too impulsive. Lynn continued. Those kids aren't easy to manage. They're all children of rich and powerful people, and they think they can do what they like. Last week, their previous teacher was admitted to the hospital. He hasn't recovered yet. It's okay, Alex assured her. They're just kids. Their energy needs to be properly directed, that's all. If you say so, she answered. By the way, I also want to thank you. Many others would too, but they're afraid to do it. Billy's been making our lives difficult since he got here, and Leonard's been helping him suppress our complaints. We're all waiting for a chance to vent our frustrations. Episode 403, Extra Studies. Alex smiled at Lynn. It was clear to him that she was the bravest of them all. No matter how much some of them might dislike Billy, they were clearly afraid that involving Alex might backfire. They had all chosen to avoid the issue. All of them, except her. But Lynn had other reasons for talking to him. She was sincerely worried that he was unprepared for dealing with his students. And she wanted him to succeed. She needed him to. She was sick of dealing with them herself. But if Alex wasn't up to the task, he was in danger of getting hurt. She sighed and gave him a worried look. Then, without saying anything more, she walked past him out of the conference room. Outside by the front entrance to the school, Leonard stood talking to Billy. So, Mr. Wilde, Leonard said, what are we going to do about this Alex kid? Billy had lit a cigarette and puffed at it furiously to calm himself. Both of them were still teeming with anger at Alex's behavior in the conference room. We'll send what we know about him to his new students, Billy said with a grim smile. They'll take care of the rest. The way those kids are, he won't make it through his first lesson. He flung his cigarette onto the asphalt in front of him and stomped on it. Then they went back inside. Meanwhile, the seniors of Class 6 were sitting in their classroom. Since all of the teachers had been called away to Alex's introduction, they had been told to study on their own. Few of them were doing so. Many of them were playing games on their phones, while others were sitting in a circle, gossiping among themselves. Lance, tell us more about this Alex, one of the students in the circle said. Lance Cartwright was the son of an important family, and he was one of the most popular students at Oak Ridge. When he spoke, the other students listened, and right now he was the center of attention. Well, I can tell you, he's extremely powerful, Lance answered. The Blood Brothers were after him, and they had rigged an entire building with bombs. Everyone thought Alex was done for. But guess what? He paused dramatically. The other students in the circle moved closer, and others gathered around him. They were all deeply curious. I'll tell you, Lance continued. Right before the bombs went off, Alex jumped from the 15th floor with Jessup Clifton on his back, and without any protective gear. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen, as if he was floating through the air. You saw it? One of the other students asked. From the 15th floor? And carrying an old man? That's impossible. He would have died. Shut up, Lance snapped. You don't know Alex. Of course I saw it. It was incredible. When he jumped out of the window, fire shot out from every window of the building. But he didn't get hurt at all, and he landed safely on the ground. Lance's eyes shone with excitement. It was as if he had placed himself in the scene. It was like an action movie, he continued, but in real life. It was so cool that I forgot to take any pictures of it." "And what happened then?" someone asked. The students were fascinated by the mysterious Alex, and they were full of imagination. "After that, not much, I think. The danger was over. But Alex is still out there, and he can do anything. Even if you don't see him, he's still a hero in our midst." "How old is he?" the student asked curiously. "I don't know," Lance said, "but he's young." Heidi was sitting at the other end of the classroom, and she had heard everything that Lance had said. With everything that had happened to her, she had her own reasons to be interested in Alex. She had heard Rufus mention Alex's name when he attacked the gang at the stables. They must have suffered because they had crossed him. "I wonder if he has a girlfriend," a girl said with raised eyebrows. "What's it to you?" a boy cried out with laughter. He was pale and slightly overweight, with an earring in his right ear and messy hair. "Do you think he can't get any girl he wants? You wouldn't have a chance." "Stop arguing," another girl cried. "We want to hear more." Whether it was hero worship or pining for a Prince Charming, Alex was on every one of their minds. Lance had asked his father for a signed picture of him many times. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to get one. "Let's talk about how we beat back all the big martial arts masters at the lake," Lance continued. He spoke with pride as if Alex was his personal friend. "How he managed to beat Lee Harshaw and save martial arts. At that time, the whole lake was filled with blood. Lee had beaten all the famous martial arts schools in the country, and nobody could do anything about it. Only Master Alex." "What's his full name?" someone asked. "I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. People like him often have hidden names, and no one dares to snoop around. Jessup Clifton protects and respects Master Alex, and he rules the city." The students were taken aback. Many of them knew Jessup's name, and they knew what it meant if Alex had his respect. Lance had been talking so much about Alex that it was all the class ever thought of. Even though they didn't even know his real name, they all worshipped him as Master Alex and fantasized about who he was. They were not alone. Word of Alex's actions had spread across the city, especially among the rich and powerful. What most people did not suspect, however, was that Master Alex was just a quiet little security guard. "Wait," someone said, as a faint buzzing noise sounded in the classroom. "Whose phone is that?" Eric, who had been sitting just outside the circle of listeners, reached into his pocket. He had received several WhatsApp messages. They were from Billy. He scrolled through them and laughed to himself. They contained all that Billy knew about the new teacher that was coming today. "Well," Eric said with a smile, "apparently, our new teacher used to be poor and living on the street. His name is Alex Ambrose." Lance walked over and read the messages. "How do you get all this information about our teachers?" he asked with a frown. "From Billy," Eric answered. "So the new teacher is coming today," Lance said. "Let's play a little game with him." "Hang on," one of the other students interjected. "You said his name was Alex. Could he be Master Alex?" "Dream on," Lance cried and slapped his classmate on the side of the head to wake him up. "As if Oak Ridge could get Master Alex to come and work for them. My dad couldn't even get a meeting with him. Nobody can. What do you think?" The students laughed sheepishly. They also knew that it was impossible. Master Alex was a hero with unparalleled martial arts skills. To imagine that he would become their teacher was a hopeless dream. One of the students turned to Eric with a confused look on his face. "Hey, Eric," he said, "what's the deal with Billy? He sent you information on the last 3 teachers we've had. Why?" "I'm not sure," Eric answered. "I think Billy has an uncle or something who's an important person. I think he's trying to do us all a solid so that someday we'll help out his uncle. But whatever. The important thing is that we don't need to study. If we just get rid of all our teachers, Billy will help us graduate with top grades. We'll be set for life." Episode 404, Making an Entrance. Eric saw things clearly. As the son of an important figure in Baltimore politics, he had been nurtured and groomed for navigating the city's politics. He was a quick learner and an independent thinker. Great things were expected of him. Lance sneered. He understood that Billy's information could be useful, but his underhanded scheming was revolting. In Lance's mind, wealth and success should be inherited or earned cleanly. Besides, a sharp mind without scruples could be a threat. "Who cares what Billy wants?" another student interrupted. "Tell us more about the new teacher. What kind of teacher is he?" "It seems that he's a PE teacher," Eric said and scoffed. "Disgraceful." "It was bound to happen," Lance said. "After you put old Mr. Goldberg in the hospital, they were bound to get someone strong and fit." Eric shot him an irritated look. "That old geezer needed a beating," he said. "So what if I fell asleep in class? He disrespected me, and he paid for it." The other students averted their eyes. Eric and Mr. Goldberg had had an especially unfriendly relationship. The class was used to driving teachers away by being troublesome and playing pranks. But Mr. Goldberg had been different. Hiring thugs to assault him had been a step too far, and everyone but Eric seemed to understand that. "All right, we get it," one of the girls exclaimed. "You're really tough, Eric. Now what should we do about this new guy?" "I'm not sure," Eric said with a smile, "but I think we should give him a nice, warm welcome." The other students leaned in and listened with glee. While they all thought Eric had gone too far with Mr. Goldberg, torturing teachers was still their favorite thing to do. Eric kept scrolling through Billy's messages and suddenly stiffened with excitement. "Wow," he exclaimed. "I guess Billy must have won the lottery or something." All of the other students leaned further in and tried to glance at his phone. "Why?" one of them asked. "What's the matter?" "He says that whoever manages to drive away the new guy gets $15,000 in cash," Eric answered. The students couldn't believe what they were hearing, and they grew giddy with excitement. Few of them needed the money, but the thought of the teaching director paying them to get rid of a teacher was immensely intriguing. And besides, it would be money they earned on their own. For the most of them, that would be a first. "That settles it," one student exclaimed. "We drive the teacher away as quickly as possible, and then we split the money." The others nodded. Lance turned to Eric. "Our teaching director certainly knows how to motivate," he said. "Tell him that we'll give Mr. Ambrose our warmest welcome, and then we'll refuse to do any work. He'll be gone before the end of the day." Eric tapped a message on his phone and pressed send. "All right," he said. "Now, does anyone have a suggestion for how to surprise our dear new teacher?" Nobody answered. "Well, then think of something." The group started murmuring among themselves about what they should do. The room was buzzing with excitement, Eric stood in the middle, like a general inspecting his troops before a battle. Then he saw something in the corner of his eye. He turned and saw Heidi sitting in a corner. She was reading. "Still reading, Heidi?" he asked. It was very strange to him, especially considering what they were planning. Heidi didn't answer. While she was also very interested in hearing about Master Alex and wondered about the new teacher as much as the rest of them, she wouldn't let it distract her from reading. Her family history wouldn't let her. Her father was a top biotechnology researcher, and she had grown up around books and knowledge. It often made her feel alone in class. She was the only one who liked to study and learn. She would probably be completely isolated if it wasn't for the fact that boys paid attention to her. They doted on her and wanted to talk to her only because of the way she looked, but she didn't care. Mostly, she found it annoying. She looked up from her book. Eric had come a little closer, and he was still glaring at her. "Leave me alone," she said. "Can't you see that I'm reading?" Eric raised his hands and backed away. "All right, fine," he replied obediently. As cocky as he was, he didn't want to offend her. Right then, the school bell rang. The self-study session was ending, and the new teacher would arrive soon. In the teacher's lounge, a group of teachers were sitting around a table. They were talking about the situation with the Class 6 seniors. "Do you think Alex will make it through his first class?" one teacher asked curiously. "Who knows?" another answered and took off his reading glasses. "Some of their previous teachers have made it through, but most of them have crawled out." "He's just a child himself," Leonard said as he came over to the table with a cup of tea and a smirk on his face. "He couldn't possibly hope to control them." Just then, Billy entered the room. He said nothing to the teachers, but simply went over to a chair on the other side of the room and sat down. As he lost himself in thought, a huge grin appeared on his face. "You've made your last mistake, Alex," he thought. "You should have stayed away from me. I took your girlfriend once, and this time I'll take even more. Those kids will eat you alive." Meanwhile, Alex was approaching the classroom. His students were sitting inside waiting for him, each one at their proper place behind their desks. They were no longer gossiping or playing games. Instead, they sat like model students waiting for their new teacher. Their textbooks were laid out in front of them, and they were all turned to the correct page. Alex walked up to the door to the classroom. It was slightly open already, and the complete silence on the other side gave him pause. If he had been any other teacher, there would have been nothing unusual about it. But Alex wasn't like any other teacher. His instincts were telling him that something was off. "There is something above the door," he thought. "Maybe a bucket of water." He looked down. "And there's something on the floor. Oil, maybe. And something on top of the oil, like tiny little metal balls." On the other side, the students had heard him approach. They were waiting eagerly for their trap to be sprung. It was an intricate design, and they had used it before to great effect. As soon as the door opened, whoever came in would be drenched with cold water, and the bucket would fall onto their head. The reaction of the victim would be to run, at which point they would slip on the steel marbles and fall into the pool of sticky oil. This setup was planned for maximum humiliation, which would hurt even more than the physical pain. Alex paused outside the door. He couldn't say for sure what was waiting for him on the other side, but the danger was palpable. He smiled scornfully as he took a step back. Then he raised his right leg and kicked the door so violently that it flew off its hinges onto the classroom floor. The water bucket came crashing down, missing him completely. Instead, it fell with a splash and a loud clang onto the floor, which now safely covered the little balls in the oil. Alex stepped in through the door frame and stood triumphantly on top of the mess below him. The students all gaped at him in stunned silence. Episode 405, A Sticky Subject. Alex walked into the classroom under the perplexed gaze of his new students. Outside in the corridor, many students and staff had come to see what all the commotion was about. At the far end of the corridor stood the principal. He couldn't help but smile. Maybe hiring Alex was a good idea after all, he thought. When Alex came into the classroom and stepped up to the teacher's desk, the stunned silence of the students turned into a buzzing murmur. None of them knew what to do. Alex had ruined the first step of their plan, and they needed a new one. They all looked to Eric, who simply waved at them to be quiet. For him, nothing had changed. The others had seemed to forget that there was a step 2. He turned to one of the girls sitting behind him to his left, and she immediately sprang to action. With an innocent look on her face, she picked up a pastry box from the floor beside her desk and walked up to Alex. As she handed the box to him, she smiled demurely at him and played with her hair. Then she went back to her desk. Eric rose. "Teacher," he began, "my name is Eric. I'm sort of the organizer for our class. We've brought you some gifts to welcome you. I hope you'll like them." He stepped forward and handed Alex a beautiful wooden box. When Alex opened it, he saw that it was filled with imported cigars. He looked up at Eric, who had already gone back to his desk. "Don't worry, teacher," Eric said. "You can eat your cake and have a smoke right here. We don't mind. You could even have a beer if you want. I've got some in my desk." He reached into his desk and pulled out a glass bottle of beer. "Please, help yourself," he said in the most respectful tone he could muster. He gestured to the chair that had been placed beside the teacher's desk. "Sit and have a chat with us." He smiled warmly and went forward to hand the beer to Alex. Alex laughed as he took the beer from Eric's hand and put it on the desk next to the other gifts. He looked down at the chair his students had prepared for him, and then he looked back at Eric with a knowing smile on his face. Eric smiled back. He was relieved. This part of the plan seemed to be working at least. But then, Alex suddenly grabbed him by the arm, put his foot forward to bend Eric's leg at the knee, and pressed him down onto the chair. Eric's smile disappeared instantly as he got stuck in the glue on the seat. While the class looked on in stunned silence, Alex turned calmly back to his gifts. Slowly and methodically, he took a closer look at each of them in turn. Then he threw it all into the trash can. There were insects baked into the cake, the beer smelled of laxatives, and gunpowder had been rolled into the cigars. The entire class stared at him in shock, but one of them had her own reasons. From the back of the classroom in the final row, Heidi had immediately recognized Alex. She could hardly believe her eyes. Her new teacher was the man who had saved her only days before. She had thought about stepping forward to stop the second prank, but the situation was so surreal that she had stopped herself. The idea that Alex would show up as a teacher at her school, let alone as her teacher, was impossible. Perhaps it's his twin brother or something, she reasoned. It can't possibly be him. Alex hadn't noticed her. He stood in front of his desk, straightened himself, and spoke out in a deep and authoritative voice. "Listen up," he said. "From now on, this class will do as I say. There won't be any more stupid pranks, and you'll all be responsible for your own studies. Understood?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned and marched out of the room. The students were left looking at him with dumbfounded looks on their faces. "What the hell just happened?" Eric asked as he tried to yank himself free from the glue-covered seat. When he found that it was useless, he stilled himself and sat with a dejected look on his face. "It's no use," Lance said. "I don't know who this guy is, but he's in charge now. He beat us." The other students agreed. They hadn't been able to process what had happened. There had been no roll call, no introduction, and no corny attempt to bond with them. In fact, Alex hadn't acted like a teacher at all. He had said one sentence and left. "Screw that," Eric shot back. "This is a setback. He won this time, but we'll strike back. I'm sure he's real proud of himself now, and he'll let his guard down." The attitude among the class changed instantly in response to Eric's words. They would come back from this. After all, they had only known their new teacher for a few minutes. They couldn't give up just yet. Heidi was conflicted. She wanted to run after the new teacher and find out if it was really Alex. It must be him, she thought. He looked and sounded just like him, and he had the same name. Her heart fluttered. Her mind was made up. She had to talk to him alone. She stood up. "Shut up," she yelled. The classroom immediately fell silent. Everyone looked at her. "What's the matter with you?" Eric asked her with surprise in his voice. He had never seen her act so aggressively. Everyone knew her as a quiet girl who never bothered anyone. And considering her family connections, that was just as well. Nobody dared to cross her anyway. "No one in the class will try anything against Mr. Ambrose again," she exclaimed. "If you do, you'll answer to me." With these words, she kicked her desk away from her and ran out of the classroom to find Alex. Lance and Eric looked at each other. They both tried to keep a straight face, but they knew that everything had changed in an instant. Eric glanced around the room with a hesitant look on his face. His classmates all met his gaze. It was obvious that they were looking to him for guidance. He had to say something. "All right, here's what's gonna happen," Lance said to break the silence. "Nothing. There'll be no more plans. If you have any ideas about what to do to the new teacher, keep them to yourselves." Everyone stared at him. "Why?" one of them dared to ask. Eric sighed in frustration. "Because Heidi said so. Didn't you hear her?"
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.